Hey guys, how are you doing? This is Zeb from Zed Outdoors and I hope you're having an awesome day. So today I've come down to see Nick Westermann. Nick, how are you doing?
Very good. And yourself there?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So if you're not familiar with Nick already, Nick is a renowned toolmaker, full-time toolmaker, based here in the middle of rural Wales, and I've come down to see him to film a series of videos that you're watching now. So this video is actually part 2 of an entire mini-series where Nick is literally taking a raw piece of steel through various processes and ending up with a finished turning Sloyd knife with the handle, etc. So in the first video, what we looked at is actually taking a raw steel, doing the basic forging, annealing and the rough shaping, and we end up to this stage here. We're going to take a close-up look in a moment so you can get a bit of a recap of where we got to in that first video. In the second video, what Nick is going to be demonstrating is his entire process for heat treating this blade, and in the preceding videos we're going to work through the remainder of the processes. A couple of things before we get straight into the meat and bones of this video. Number one, all the videos in this series and the other videos that I've come down to film with Nick on this particular visit down will be linked below in the description. Highly recommend you go check those out. And what I'm also going to be doing is breaking this video out into different timestamps, so all the different chapters, so that will help you facilitate as you're watching this video to know kind of where we're at. So if you scroll along the timeline, you can see those chapters. Also, I will put the chapters down below in the description, and on the left hand side you will see the timestamps. YouTube has a very cool feature. If you click on that time, it will jump straight to that section, saving you having to manually scroll through. The other thing I'm going to be doing is put links below to the Hunan Home website, where you're going to be able to buy this particular knife in the different sections, as well as some of the kind of tools and materials around it, this entire process that we're covering in this series. So like I said, in this video we're going to be looking at the heat treat, and so without further ado, I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. So Nick, before we begin with the actual process itself, could you just do a brief recap where we got to in the previous video?
Right, yes, because we did actually start the heat treat a little bit. Obviously we forged the steel out, and when we got it to a high temperature, we would have damaged the grain, we would have enlarged the grain by heating up to high temperature, which would have meant that if we had then just let it cool when we cropped it, it would have shattered. So to get it into a state that it was safe to do the next stages of shaping, we did an annealing cycle where we got it up to a red heat and let it cool very slowly, and that's allowed the steel to relax really, and it allows the grain structure to refine slightly, to get smaller, and it softens the steel so we can do it. A lot of people, when they talk about heat treat, they just everybody thinks about the sort of forging fire thing where you get it red hot, quench it in oil and then pull it out so it catches fire, which makes good television, and that's what I think of heat treat. But for me it's a bit more, there's a bit more to it than that, in that for me, a lot of good heat treat is about refining the grain. It's not just about the hardening process. And because with these blades, I forge them in a single heat, there's no chance to refine the grain while you're forging it, because it's just done in one, it's blasted out at high heat. But then I'll do an annealing process, which is starting the heat treatment, and then I'm going to carry on in the forge. It's not very accurate because it's just done by eye, but it's a start. If I'm doing a bigger blade or something like an axe, I'll always do the finishing heats when I'm forging at a lower temperature, because that sort of starts the heat treat process. And to my mind, that's, and some of the other blades I do, I'll always finish off at a lower heat, because I'm sort of counting that as what I'll talk about as normalising cycles. So you can do some of the forging at a sort of a heat treat temperature, so you're actually refining the steel as you're working it. But there wasn't a chance to do this because, as you know, it was blasted out in a single heat under a power hammer. So that's the starter heat treatment. But what we're going to do now is put this into the 2-brick forge, which we've posted a video on how we made it. The forge is normally running at 880, which is a bit high. We're going to do everything at 840 to keep it simple with this. But the reality is that when it's a small forge, and when I put some cold steel in, the temperature's going to drop. So I'm going to put the steel in now alongside, and you'll watch the temperature drop as it goes. Whereas if I got the forge up to 840, put cold steel in, you'd probably be waiting, the temperature would drop to 800 or 780 or whatever, and you'd be waiting ages for it to come up to heat. So it makes more sense to overshoot and then bring it down with a cool. cool steel. So what I'm going to be doing now is the normalising cycles on the steel, which is heating up to 840 and then check that it hasn't warped when I take it out, and then if it hasn't warped, I'll just let it cool slowly. If it has warped, I'll go straight to this anvil where I'll straighten it. And the normalising cycles, again, each time you heat up, this is part of thermocycling, so you're heating the steel up and letting it cool, and that will refine the grain. Each time it heats up and cools down, it will, the grain will break down and it will get finer, and an edge which is made up of fine grains is stronger than an edge which is made of coarse grains, which is why we're doing it. So I'm going to just let this heat up now. Okay, so one thing to be aware of with running a furnace like this is that the thermocouple just tells you how hot the thermocouple is, and that's not necessarily the temperature of the blade steel. So you always need to check that when you're at your right temperature, your temperature range, because the trouble is with a digital thing, if you've got your eyes set on getting it 840, you'll want it to be bang on 840, whereas the reality is anywhere between 820 and 850 is probably fine for normalising cycles. It's not that critical. So what you're looking for is that the thermocouple is at the temperature range you want, and the blades are looking to be the same colour, which is the same temperature as the thermocouple. So don't get blinded just by the fact you've got a digital reader, just because that says that temperature, it doesn't mean the blades are the right temperature. But at this point you can see that the thermocouple is the same colour as the blades, so we're good to go on the next stage. Okay, so these are up to temperature now. I'm going to pull the first one out and check it straight, and it's not, so I'm just going to make an adjustment while it's hot. That's good enough. We'll check again. I'll just put this on top to air cool, and that's all you really need to do for normalising. Check this one. That's doing better. And while we're waiting for those to cool, we might as well put in the next couple. If I was using my big forge, I'd be able to run all 9 or 10 at once, but 2 is probably the best that we can manage with this.
So when you say the normalising, what's happening here?
Well, the steel is heating up to about the critical temperature. We're all looking for 840, so to simplify it, we're doing everything at the same temperature, which will be the quenching temperature. But the steel will heat up, and you get there's 2 things which are happening, is that there's stresses set up from the forging, and also this tang, although it looks nice, if I've got these shoulders offset, you can sometimes get a bit of, it will tend to pull over as it heats up and cools, and that can tend to make it warp. So it looks nice, but it can be a bit of a pain. So I'm just checking that it wants to be straight, but it is staying straight, because there's nothing worse than quenching it and find that it warps. But if it heats up and cools down and stays straight, it's a pretty good idea. You get a pretty good idea that it's going to stay straight when you quench it, and you haven't got to mess about with it. So that's why the more times that you normalise, the more likely it is that it'll stay straight. But beyond that, as I say, each thermocycling, letting it heat up and cool down, each time you do that, the grain size will refine slightly. It will get broken down by the action of heating up and cooling down. It's sort of the opposite of, crystals grow in lava. If you keep minerals or anything at a high temperature, the crystals will grow in size. So the longer you keep something at a high heat, the more the crystal size will grow. And it's similar with steel, that if you keep it at high heat for a long time, it will grow. So we don't want to limit how long it's at the critical temperature, or within the critical temperature range. So we'll heat it up and then let it cool down, and that action of heating up and cooling down will break up the large grains which would have grown when it was at the high heat for forging.
So Nick, in this stage of the process, you let those cool down. Now, I believe you just put them back into the forge.
Yes, I do. I mean, they don't have to be completely stone cold, but you want to at least lose the red heat and a bit more. They need to cool down. You don't want to put them straight back in. But yes, 3 normalising cycles seems to be a sort of standard among knife makers, and it's certainly, but the benefit that you get in reduced grain size obviously decreases the more normalising cycles you do, but it also, the chances of a blade warping decreases the more normalising cycles you do, and 3 seems to be pretty decent. But I get very few warpages, whereas if I just did 1, the number of warp blades would be a lot higher. So for me, 3 works well, so I stick with 3, which is, a lot of people say 3, and it seems to be good.
So in the second and third cycle now, what you do the same. You're going to leave it in here for a while.
Yes, exactly.
You take it
the
out,
same.
straighten it out if it needs so.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that on the second cycle it won't need straightening, and if it needs straightening on the third cycle, I would do a 4th cycle. So I'm going to keep going until I can take it out and it stays straight. If I have to sort of hammer it straight after the 3rd cycle, there's a fair chance it might warp on the quench. So, but normally they're fine by the 3rd cycle. I think it was Dave Budd says they get tired of bending, you know, they just got fed up and they'll stay straight. If you keep straightening them out long enough, they'll give up doing it. So but normally 3 is enough, but I'm not expecting to straighten on the 3rd cycle. Okay, so I'm taking out, this is the second normalising cycle on the blade, and yeah, that stayed straight. I haven't got to re-straighten it. That's okay. So now I'll just put these 2 in for their second normalising cycle. Can be a bit difficult to remember where you are on it, to be honest. So normally I have an arrangement so I know where I am on the second and third cycles. But
so just actually that leads me on to something. So we spoke off camera that obviously we're using this 2.5 brick forge that we showed in another video that will be linked to down below. But just underneath that is obviously your main forge. And you said you were doing, was it batches of 10 or something?
Yeah, I can do, sometimes I'll actually do a batch of 40, but yes, I might have 10 in at any one time. In a similar way, in the forging video where I'd take one out and put one back in, I can run the same sort of cycles. So I will take one out and straighten it. Well, actually, I'd put one in and then I would take one out and straighten it. And then by the time I've done that and put it down, I could then put a new blade, which will have cooled, in the gap where the old one is, and then take out another hot one. So there's no downtime, I'm not waiting round, but by the time I've got back to the 10th blade, it's actually been in long enough, but it's done a thermocycle. So that's quite a quick way to work through a big batch of blades, rather than doing them all in one. I mean, you take 40 blades out and you've got to try and straighten them while they're still hot, which doesn't make sense to me, it's a similar sort of thing that I was showing in the forging, that you put one in and take one out, you get locked into a cycle. It's very hard to stop. If someone comes in or a phone goes, you just have to ignore it really, because you get locked into these cycles, but that's often how I work.
So is that why you've been ignoring my calls?
Yes, and everybody else. Yes.
So Nick, have you completed 3 normalising cycles then?
Yes, we've done the 3 cycles, and the blades are now staying straight. They're heating up and cooling down, which gives me high confidence that at quench they're not going to warp, but we'll see. But we've done the 3 cycles. I'm now going to, the forge is slightly overshooting, it's 850, so I'm going to put another 2 in, and this is going to be for the final heating cycle, which will include quenching. So these are now in, and you'll see the temperature will drop a bit as we put 2 cold blades in. So what we'll do now is we'll heat the blades up, and ideally we want to let them sit for 5 minutes at temperature, and I'll probably, hopefully we'll work this out, I'll talk long enough that by the time I've finished talking they'll have sat for 5 minutes. That's the aim, so I've got to fill in a bit now. The idea is that we're going to heat this up, and this will probably upset metallurgists, but how I describe it on course is that if you heat steel up to its critical temperature, steel is a mixture of iron and carbon. The iron and carbon will go into a solution, and you get it to a critical temperature and it will mix together, and you'll get the iron and carbon actually combining together. If you let it cool very slowly, they'll separate out and you won't get any hardening at all. And if you let it cool really slowly, that's annealing, which is really softening it. Normalising, it comes apart and it's not hardened appreciably, which is the air cooling stage. If you can cool it very quickly, which is in a liquid which will pull the heat out very quickly, if you quench it, it will cool so quickly that the iron and carbon can't separate, and you'll get structures which you've heard of iron carbide. You'll get hard structures forming, which is what hardens the steel, or what makes it hard. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to heat the steel up, give it long enough that the iron carbon gets into solution and mixes well, for want of a better term. As I say, metallurgists probably shouldn't listen to this. Heat it up, but then cool it very quickly and we'll harden it. So the quench medium which we use to cool it is important. You've heard of like O1 steel, where the O signifies oil, as in oil hardening. You do get some steels which are water hardening, but they're not so common now. And generally a quick oil is better. But in terms of speed of hardening, if you were to harden in water, that will pull the heat out or cool it as quickest. So that is the quickest or most that'll give the quickest hardening. You can actually increase that by putting salt in the water and make a brine, and it will cool even quicker, but your chances of busting the steel is much higher. Bearing steel has enough alloys in that it will harden effectively in oil, so we're going to use oil. It's very risky hardening bearing steel in water, and not necessary because you get enough hardening in oil. One of the weird things with water is, as you'd imagine, if you use cold water, it will cool quicker. If you use hot water, it cools slower. Oil, however, because its viscosity changes with temperature, it actually will cool quicker if it's warm. And what will happen if you quench in cold oil is that you'll put the steel in and you'll get a bubble of hot oil, which is then contained by the cold oil, which isn't as viscous, and the heat isn't transmitted through the oil as quickly. But warm oil will move easier, and so you'll actually get a quicker quench. I have got proper quenching oils which I normally use, but I'm going to quench in vegetable oil, which is just in this tin here, and I've heated it up. It was up against the forge here, and I know from experience it sounds very hot, but 60 to 70 degrees seems to work best for vegetable oil. It needs to be quite hot to get it thin. If you get it too hot, then it sort of boils and catches fire before it actually does any cooling, but 60 to 70 seems to be a sweet spot. So that's what we're doing. I did actually have it up against the forge and it got a little bit too hot, so I've let it cool down a bit more. What I'm going to use is one of our readers, and these come with a probe which you can't use in the forge for heat treat, but we can use that to test the temperature of the oil. And there we go. I said 60 to 70. Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
So these are thermocouples that are available on the Hunan Home website?
Yes. Yes, well this is the reader, and this is this reader comes with this simple thermocouple which we could use for, if you're doing tempering in an oven, you can use that. It will go up to that temperature, so this is flexible enough, you can put this in an oven and use it to double check the temperature of your oven at home if you're using an oven. We're going to be tempering with a deep fat fryer, and I could bung that in, or I have in the past bunged in and checked that the temperature dial on the deep fat fryer actually equates to the temperature the oil's at. So you can use it for, well, what you would normally think as high temperature measuring, but in actual heat treat terms it won't take like forge temperatures, but it's good for tempering and checking the temperature of quenchants. So
yeah, one thing that I think that we were doing just off camera as we were preparing for this scene is You mentioned about the importance of mixing the oil when checking the temperature.
That's true, and I did just mix it without saying why. Yeah, because temperature rises. When I put this, if you're heating it on top of something, that tends to work quite well because it's heated from the bottom and it'll mix quite well. But when I put it against the side, it'll be very hot at the surface and cool at the bottom. So just mixing it up and checking the temperature is much better than just putting a thermocouple in at the top and thinking the temperature of the top is the same as the temperature of the bottom. So giving it a stir is important. Yeah, that's all right. So yeah, I think I've probably talked long enough that we're up to temperature here. So I'm going to take the steel out. It doesn't matter how long you spend grabbing it, but when you've got it, when it actually comes out the forge, you want to get into the oil quite quickly. And I know we've all seen the forging fire thing where you swirl it about, slosh it about, and then take it out for it to catch fire. I don't do any of that. I'll put it in and I'll just move it very slowly through the oil. And I always go faster than I think because quenching is still a little bit exciting, but very slowly zigzag through the oil. I learnt this from, I went to see Ray Isles from, well, Ashley Isles' son, watching him do it, and he was like, yeah, don't wave it about, just move it very slowly. If it's cold, what happens when you quench is they're saying it hardens, you change the structure of the steel, it will shrink slightly and scale isn't compressible, and the steel will shrink and the scale will stay the same size and it will crack away. If you're doing a bigger blade, and this is how I first realised this was important, if you're doing a bigger blade and you're doing this moving through the oil, you can actually hear the scale cracking off, and it actually cracks off most at the point you stop when you change direction. So it actually cools quickest, not even when it's moving, it's when it stops that you'll get the cracking occur, which suggests to me that actually you don't really need to be moving very fast. And Ray was saying you get eddy currents forming. So anyway, so I don't wave it about a huge amount, but I will take it out and put it in quite quickly. So let's grab the blade and we'll go straight in, and I'll just move slowly through the oil. Oh, I've hit my quenching. And I'm not too fussed about quenching the tang out, but I will eventually do that. And then after a few seconds I'll pull it out, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire brush it off on the anvil. If it's hardened properly, the scale should crack off, and it's quite difficult to see how straight the blade is when the scale, you see you've got a big bit of scale coming off. That's a good sign. This is a good sign but I'll wire brush it off and then sight down it and check it looks straight, and it does. Steel, although it hardens, we sort of set the hardening process in motion. There's a little bit of you've got a little window. I know this might not look like a sensible thing to do. Yeah. You've got a little window when it hasn't actually fully hardened, so you've got a little bit of time that you can actually hammer on it and do any straightening. If I left that another 30 seconds, I might well snap it off. You really don't want to overdo that, but if you need to do any adjustment, there's a little window. So what I do now, I haven't actually put it on, but I'll stick it in a deep fat fryer, and that will be doing the tempering. So I'll go back to the forge now and just quench a second one, because I put a second one in. Exactly the same thing. I'll go in, move slowly, and if you were to go, I always go like I'm cutting the blade through the water. If you go side to side, you'll cool one side more than the other, and that can definitely cause warping. I read something about how people who used to water quench hand files by hand used to use, if the blade came out, or if a file came out and it was slightly warped, they could correct the warp by the direction they moved it through the through the water, because you get a bit of warping. So they could actually use this warping action set up by quenching in that direction to straighten any warpage, I don't know if that's a word, warping. So I'll wire brush off, that's cracking off nicely. Check for straight. That's dead straight, there's no need to do anything to that. And then just because I do stuff in batches, I'll put the next two in, but we don't really need to watch that, but we will do those next. What I'll do now is I'll just show you the deep fat fryer, although it is just a cheap deep fat fryer. It's running on vegetable oil, which smells a little bit nicer. It's not plugged in, but I don't think you need to see me plug it in. I'll turn it up to 190, which will be enough to temper the steel.
That's centigrade, yeah?
Centigrade, yes, I'm always talking centigrade at this point. And I think the good thing about a deep fat fryer is that if it was on, which is not, but imagine it was on, you put it in oil at 190 degrees, within seconds the whole blade is up to 190. If you put it in an oven, commercial, domestic oven, it will take a bit of time to get up to heat, and you might locally overheat the tip of the blade while it's coming up to heat, whereas if it's in the liquid, it's much easier. So if you're doing a domestic oven, I would always put it in a baking tray with a wrap of foil just to allow it to come up to heat a bit more evenly, and so it'll take longer. You might need, this sort of a standard is an hour at temperature, but I think if you put this in for an hour, you get a full hour. If you put it in an oven for an hour, you might only get 15-20 minutes at temperature. So leave it for 2 hours, or if you think an hour is enough in a domestic oven, you could probably argue that 15-20 minutes in a deep fat fryer is enough. What I didn't explain is tempering as to why we do it. We've hardened the steel. And the analogy I always use is now hard, although not quite yet, but it will get hard to be hard like glass. So you can't hit it, you can't flex it. It takes a little bit of time to set up, or that's the phrase that Ray I'll use. And it's definitely true that if I've got a hardness tester, which actually I ended up buying from Ray Isles, that's why I went there. If you test the hardness after an hour, the steel will be hard, but it won't be as hard. You might come up to, say, 60 Rockwell hardness, which is pretty good. Leave it overnight, and it might have jumped up another point, or another 2 points, might come up to 62. Leave it another week, and it will come up to 62.5. It still carries on hardening over time. So that's why you've got this little window that you can actually hammer it, because it's sort of an exponential hardening. Obviously it slows off, but there's a little window when it hasn't hardened. But when it's hard like glass. So if you make an edge an edge from fully hardened steel with no tempering, the danger is that when the edge hits something hard, and it's like a knot, and it flexes, because at a certain point you put enough pressure on any steel, the edge is going to move. If it's hard, it'll just chip. You'll get a little crescent, and it will deflect and it will snap. If you haven't hardened it, the edge will deflect and it won't spring back, it will deform, and that's a rolled edge. So edges will roll or chip. If you temper it, ideally it will flex, and then it's softened enough, but it will come back to shape, and so you won't damage it. And I'll show you when we've actually ground a blade, I'll show you this edge deflection thing to show you what that looks like. But tempering, again, it cuts back some of the hardness on the steel and increases the toughness. And if you heat it up to, it depends on the steel, but yeah, 190, 200 degrees centigrade works well for bearing steel, so that's what I'm using. And this goes up to 190, so I'm doing 190, and that's what I've used for a long time. This is an old one which I've retired but not yet got rid of, but they do have a rather tough life. Yes, but it works. I think it's about £30 for one of these, and it works very well. So.
And how long would you leave that in there for?
An hour is generally what I do. I'll leave it for an hour if I've remembered to switch it on, yes. And sometimes overnight if I forget to switch it off, but that's not fun. It doesn't do the steel any harm if you temper for longer, but the surprising amount of smoke comes off these at 190, so you really don't want to. Normally, I'll actually leave it outside when I'm doing it, because even though it's just vegetable oil, it's not very nice. The smoke that comes off it, but an hour is the sort of standard, and I see no reason to change that.
So that's been in there for about an hour or so. What's next to kind of wrap up this part of the process?
Right, yeah. As far as the steel's concerned, nothing. That's it. I could just turn it off and let it cool, but then they'd be oily and gunky. So what I do is I'll just drain off any excess. I mean, I've just got some ripped up tissue, although you could use sawdust or whatever, and bung that in. And then all I do is just shake this about a bit to get the oil off. I mean, I'm not going to pick them up because they're at 190 degrees, but they will be in there, and the oil will they'll be absorbed by the oil. But as I say, they're hot now, so I can't actually do that. But that will absorb the oil, and they'll be finished and good to go for the next stage.
So there you have it, my friends. That is a wrap for this video in this series. Nick, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It went well. Yeah.
It was very eye-opening for me as well, seeing the whole process and how you explained everything. So as we explained at the beginning of this video, this is part of a mini-series. And obviously in this video, we looked at the heat tree. And what we're going to be looking at in the next installment of this mini-series on a turning Sloyd knife is establishing the profile and grinding the bevel. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
So what we're going to do with that video, we're going to go deep into that topic. And like I said, we're going to finish off the series with a finished knife. So all the components in the series, including this video that you just watched now, are linked to down below in the description. And 3 quick reminders. Number 1, all the kind of series in the video, like I said, are linked to down below. But 3 things to remind you of. Number 1 is that this video has been timestamped to help facilitate you watching this video. And you can refer back to this as an ongoing resource. And obviously those timestamps are also below in the description. The second thing is various things that we've referenced throughout this video, such as the Thermocouple, etc., are available on the Huhn & Hone website run by Nick Westermann, and links to that, everything that we mentioned will be down below in the description. Also kind of tied in with that, like we were using the 2.5 brick forge, we've done a completely separate video. It's already out by the time you're watching this, and also that will be linked to below as well in the description. And the final thing is the Instagram profile, where Nick is very active with the Huhn & Hone side of things. And you can see the constant developments with the innovational products that Nick has got in the pipeline, as well as everything that he's done up until now. So as well as the website, on the Instagram, you can see things in real play as he's working on things day to day and week to week. As I mentioned at the very beginning, if you're unfamiliar with Nick, this is what he does full time, and this is what he's renowned for with the tool making. So by following him on Huhn & Hone, as well as his personal profile, you can see the myriad of things that he gets up to. So that is a wrap for this video on the heat tree. We look forward to seeing you on the next installment of this mini series. And as always, I hope whatever you're doing, you have a blessed day, a blessed week ahead. From Nick Westermann of Huhn & Hone and myself, Zed Outdoors, peace out.